Ever get that feeling? Like something's hidden right there under the surface, like even the simplest story. Well, it's got a whole world inside it just waiting to be discovered. Well, today we're diving deep, and I mean really deep, into what starts off like a totally normal scene, just a dark wood, a simple encounter.
Right.
But trust me, what unfolds in these first few pages, it's going to send a chill right down your spine and leave you wondering, what is really going on in this world?
Absolutely. And it's especially intriguing because we're starting right at the very beginning, the prologue to A Game of Thrones. George R.R. Martin, right? Now, anyone who's even a little bit familiar with this series knows this is the start of something massive. But even in this small, seemingly insignificant scene, Martin is setting the stage. You can see these core ideas taking root, the sense of an impending threat that will really resonate throughout the entire saga.
Oh, absolutely. It's all there. And right at the center of this initial mystery, we have these three men of the Night's Watch. They're north of the wall, that giant ice wall guarding the realm. We've got Gord, a real weathered veteran.
Yeah.
Will, a seasoned ranger.
Okay.
And then there's young highborns like the back of his hand.
Like home.
And then you've got Royce, who's stepping into this world with, well, a completely different set of expectations.
Absolutely. And it's so much more than just character development, right? It immediately highlights how differently we perceive danger, depending on our background or understanding. I mean, Guarded's weariness, it speaks volumes about the realities of what they do every day, the weight of their duty, while Royce's, well, his youthful confidence hints at this disconnect, like he's not quite grasping those realities yet. Their mission, we quickly learn, is to track down these wildling raiders. Now, for anyone who needs a quick reminder, wildlings are the people living beyond the wall, often viewed with suspicion and hostility by those in the Seven Kingdoms.
Exactly. And so they're on the trail, following the tracks of these wildlings, and they find them. All right, they find them. But not at all as expected. They're all dead.
Yeah.
And that's where this seemingly simple scenario takes this sharp, dark turn. The circumstances surrounding their deaths. They're strange, to say the least. And right away, there's this disagreement, this tension among the Night's Watchmen. It's not just the fact that they're dead, it's the how.
That's what really gets you thinking, right? It's not your typical battle scene, not just a case of, oh, they got caught out in the cold. There's this feeling, this undercurrent of something else. And that's exactly what we're going to dig into today. We're going to dissect every little observation, trace how the tension ratchets up, and see if we can understand those subtle clues Martin throws our way. Because he's hinting at something terrifying, something that goes way beyond the ordinary.
So right off the bat, as soon as they stumble upon these bodies, Garrett, he's adamant. Dead is dead, he says. We have no business with the dead. He's ready to turn back right then and there.
Okay.
It's like his years of experience, they've taught him something. To recognize a situation that just feels wrong on a deeper level, it's more than just, him being tired or weary, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely. Garrett's resistance, it's immediate and it's visceral. It highlights that crucial difference between, between experience and a more naive sense of duty. He's seen enough death, I think, to know when a scene doesn't quite add up, when the silence is more ominous than peaceful, and this immediately clashes with Royce's perspective, right?
Yes, completely. Royce, he's almost dismissive in his reaction. Do the dead frighten you? He asks. Like he's trying to assert his authority,
Right.
Maybe even masking his own, his unease with a bit of bravado. And then he questions whether they're actually dead. Are they dead? He asks. What proof have we? Like he's looking for this very concrete, logical evidence, something he can see, something he can understand.
Royce's skepticism, I think, it probably stems from his upbringing, from his noble background.
Yeah.
He's probably used to a world where things are neatly explained, where direct evidence is everything. So in a way, his limited experience in the harsh realities beyond the wall, it blinds him to the more subtle signs, the things that are clearly bothering the others.
And Will, he tries to offer this bit of folk wisdom. My mother told me that dead men sing no songs, he says.
Right.
It's simple, almost childlike in its way of stating the obvious. Death is final. But Royce just brushes it aside. Never believe anything you hear at a woman's tit, he says, with this very, very lordly air. There are things to be learned even from the dead.
Oh, that's such a telling exchange, isn't it?
Yep.
It's not just about the social hierarchy, It's about how differently they approach knowledge and understanding. Will and Garrett, they draw on common sense, on accumulated experience. But Royce, He leans on intellectual curiosity and maybe a little bit of intellectual superiority.
And ironically,
Yes.
he's about to get a very, very harsh lesson from the dead.
A lesson he won't soon forget.
Right. And Garrett, he just keeps laying out the practical dangers, the long journey back, the fading light. 8 days, maybe 9, he says, and night is falling. He's focused on their survival, in this incredibly hostile environment. But Royce, he waves it all away. It does that every day about this time, he says. Are you unmanned by the dark, Garrett?
Wow.
Again, there's that disdain, that lack of respect for Garrett's very valid concerns.
Yeah, it really goes beyond just the setting, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You can see how Royce underestimates the environment itself as a potential threat.
Right. He's just not getting it. But what really stood out to me, it's Will's unease.
Yeah.
He's a seasoned ranger. He's been beyond the wall God knows how many times.
Right.
But he has this deep-seated feeling. Something was different tonight, he thinks. He feels this edge to this darkness, something beyond just the usual wild. It's like his instincts, honed by years of experience, are screaming at him.
That's what makes his apprehension so significant. He's attuned to those subtle shifts, those almost invisible signs that, that something's off. And his gut feeling, this knowing that something was different tonight, it foreshadows the unnatural horror that they're about to encounter.
Yeah, he can't put his finger on it, but he knows it in his bones.
Mm-hmm.
And then when he describes what he saw at the wildling camp, it's full of these little details that just don't add up.
Yeah.
8 bodies, men and women, but notably no children. A lean-to covered in snow, a fire pit with no embers, no fire burning, and then this utter stillness.
Yes.
No living man ever lay so still, he says. That line, it just hangs there, immediately suggesting something beyond natural death.
The fact that there are no children, it's a subtle detail, but it's important. It suggests something.
Good.
Beyond your typical raiding party or conflict.
Mm-hmm.
And the untouched fire pit, that's another odd thing. In this kind of freezing environment, why wouldn't they have kept a fire going?
Right, and then Wool's description of that unnatural stillness, it's like the first real clue that something supernatural might be going on, this stillness that defies any sort of natural explanation. And here's something that really struck me. Will saw no blood.
Oh, wow.
Think about that for a minute. 8 dead people, and there's no sign of a struggle, no bloodstains. And then there were weapons present, swords, bows, and there's this very specific detail, a heavy-looking double-bladed axe just lying beside one of the bodies. And it's a detail that Martin really makes sure we notice. It's like, it's significant, even if we don't yet understand why.
It's so strange, right? You would expect, with multiple deaths, there should be some sign of blood. It completely throws off any natural human explanation for what might have happened. Yeah. And then the fact that there are weapons there, especially that untouched axe, it just sleeping. But Will is insistent. Fall in, he says, with the certainty in his voice that Royce just doesn't seem to get.
And then there's the wind and the increasing cold. Will even mutters, almost to himself, "The wind, my lord." Like he's trying to explain away his own shiver as something natural. But you just know deep down it's something far more profound.
It's like
natural. But you just know deep down it's something far more profound.
It's like the very atmosphere itself is turning hostile. And then you have Garrett with his ominous warnings about the cold. He's completely convinced that the cold was what killed them. And he describes it so vividly. He says, it steals up on you quieter than will. Peaceful, like. It's this chillingly beautiful image, but incredibly unsettling given all these unexplained deaths.
But of course, Royce just dismisses it. Such eloquence, Garrett, he says sarcastically. You had it injecting Garrett's theory, but he's also belittling his experience and wisdom. It's condescending and really revealing about Royce's character.
It shows a total lack of respect for the hardships these men have endured. And Garrett, he's got the scars to prove it. Missing ears, toes, a finger, all lost to the cold. He even tells this chilling story about his brother, found frozen at his watch with a smile on his face.
Yeah.
It really paints this grim picture of the deceptive peace that death by extreme cold can bring.
But Royce's response, it's just unbelievable. You dress more warmly, Garrett, he says. It's dismissive, almost cruel.
It underscores his privilege, doesn't it? He's so detached from the realities faced by the men of the Night's Watch.
But then Will throws a curveball. He says, they couldn't have froze. Not if the wall was weeping. It wasn't cold enough. The wall weeping. That means there's moisture running down the ice, indicating warmer temperatures above freezing.
And that's a key piece of evidence that contradicts Garrett's theory, right? It's the first real indication that something more unusual, something beyond the natural cold, is responsible for these deaths.
Royce, though, he tries to cling to reason. Talks about light frosts, a flurry of snow. But even he has to admit, it shouldn't have been enough to kill people dressed in furs, people who had shelter and knew how to make fire. And yet, he still has this cocksure smile, convinced he'll find a logical explanation.
Yeah, he's clinging to that rational worldview despite all the evidence to the contrary, and of course he orders them to continue on to the camp.
And so they set off toward this empty camp, and the tension, it just keeps ratcheting up. You can practically feel the reluctance among the men.
Their duty compels them to obey, but their instincts are screaming at them to turn back.
And Martin doesn't let up on the atmosphere. The deepening twilight, the sky, the color of an old bruise, the moon slowly rising. It all adds to this sense of foreboding.
It's like the setting itself is becoming a character, this ominous presence that's closing in around them.
Royce, always impatient, wants to press on faster. And Will, fueled by his fear, actually challenges Royce, suggests that he take the lead. It shows how scared he is to risk insubordination like that.
That fear's overriding everything else. His usual deference to authority is just gone.
And then this chilling wolf howl echoes through the woods. They decide to proceed on foot. And it's then that Garrett, the voice of experience, mutters, "There's something wrong here," he says. "Can't you feel it? Listen to the darkness." It's like the environment itself is warning them, and Garrett is the only one who's really paying attention.
Garrett trusts his instincts, and he's picking up on something deeply unsettling.
But Royce, he even draws his sword, this bag that looks like it's never seen a day of real battle. It's a stark contrast to Will and Garrett's practical worn gear, and it's like a visual representation of their different approaches to this situation.
Royce is relying on appearances, on his assumed authority, while Will and Garrett understand that this situation calls for a different kind of preparedness.
Exactly. Will even tries to offer some practical advice. He says, "The trees are too close, my lord," warning Royce that his sword will get tangled. He suggests a knife would be more useful. But Royce, arrogant as ever, says, "If I need instruction, I will ask for it." His arrogance is blinding him to the wisdom of those who have actual experience in this environment.
And that's the most dangerous thing, isn't it? When you let your pride override your common sense.
They even argue about fire. Garrett, relying on his experience, knows that some enemies a fire will keep away. He's clearly thinking about threats beyond just animals,
Right.
But Royce refuses again, thinking about stealth. You can practically feel Garrett's frustration at this point.
He's trying to warn them, but Royce just won't listen.
And then we get this small detail, but it's so vivid. The climb up to Will's vantage point. Royce's ringmail is clanking loudly, his muffled curses echoing through the trees. It really paints a picture of how out of his element he is. This is not a knight's battlefield.
He's a knight in shining armor in the wrong kind of forest.
And then, the moment that changes everything, they reach the clearing, and it's empty. Will is stunned. His heart stopped in his chest. All 8 bodies have vanished. It's the moment when any hope of a rational explanation just disappears.
And that feeling of your heart stopping, it's the most primal fear, isn't it? The realization that you are facing something completely outside your understanding.
And Royce, his reaction is almost unbelievable. He laughs. "Your dead men seem to have moved camp, Will," he says.
Yeah.
Still trying to make a joke out of it, still convinced there's a normal reason for this.
It's denial, pure and simple. He can't accept what he's seeing because it just doesn't fit into his worldview.
But Will is speechless. His eyes are fixed on the one thing that hasn't moved. The axe. That huge double-bladed battle axe still lying there in the snow. It screams danger. Why would anyone leave behind such a valuable weapon?
It's a clue, a big one, that something is really, really wrong. It defies logic. It's almost like whatever.
Royce, still missing the point, tells Will to get up. He's still so focused on his initial mission, he can't even see what's right in front of him.
He's stuck in that old way of thinking, unable to adapt to the new, terrifying reality unfolding before him.
And then Royce calls out, "Who goes there?" His voice. Well, maybe it's betraying a hint of fear now, but the silence that follows is thick, heavy, broken only by the normal sounds of the forest, which makes the absence of a human response even more chilling.
It's a silence full of anticipation, a silence that screams danger.
Will, high up in the tree, catches a glimpse of movement, pale shapes in the woods. Then they're gone. He immediately doubts himself, wondering if his fear is making him see things. It's that moment of uncertainty before the true horror reveals itself.
Will's glimpse of those shapes, it brings the supernatural element directly into the story. But his doubt, his questioning, it's so human, isn't it? It's that struggle to believe the unbelievable, even when you're seeing it with your own eyes.
Royce feels it now, though. "Answer me!" he shouts, his voice full of fear. Why is it so cold? And it's true, the temperature has plunged, suddenly, unnaturally.
That's the presence of the others, their power, reaching out and touching the natural world. It's a chilling, tangible sign of their arrival.
And then it appears.
Sure.
The first, other. Tall, gaunt, with skin so pale it's almost disturbing, and it's wearing this armor that seems to shift and shimmer like moonlight on water. It's completely alien, something out of a nightmare.
The others are described as being otherworldly, and this description really emphasizes their inhumanity. The shifting armor, that unnatural pallor. It's a visual that defies explanation, that tells you right away, this is not something from this world.
Royce hisses a warning, telling it to stay back. His voice cracks with fear. He throws back his cloak dramatically and draws his sword. And at that moment, the wind stops. The cold intensifies. Even the forest itself seems to be holding its breath.
It's like the entire natural world is reacting to the presence of this supernatural being, the stillness, the intense cold. It's all so ominous.
And the other's weapon. It's not made of any kind of steel that Will recognizes. It's a long sword, but it almost seems to be alive with moonlight, translucent, with his faint blue shimmer. And somehow, Will just knows. It's sharper than any razor.
It's a magical weapon, forged from something beyond human understanding. It immediately highlights the power imbalance in this confrontation.
Royce, despite the fear, he faces it with a kind of, well, a desperate courage. Dance with me then, he says, raising his sword. His hands are shaking, but in that moment, even Will sees him as a true man of the Night's Watch.
In that moment, Royce rises to the occasion. You can see a glimmer of the man he could have been, if not for his arrogance.
And then Will sees their eyes. Blue, he thinks, deeper and bluer than any human eyes, a blue that burned like ice. It's this chilling detail that really sets them apart. They're not human.
That description of their eyes, it's so iconic. It's a perfect encapsulation of their coldness, their alien nature.
More of them emerge from the woods. 3, 4, 5. Royce, focused on the first one, doesn't even see them. Will knows he should warn him, but he's paralyzed by fear. It's just heartbreaking watching him struggle with this, knowing that it's too late.
Will's inaction in this moment highlights the power of fear. He knows what he should do, but he simply cannot act.
The pale sword strikes, and the sound. It's not the clash of steel, it's this high-pitched, unearthly sound, like an animal screaming in pain.
It's a sound that tells you this is not a normal battle. This is something entirely different, something beyond human comprehension.
Royce is fighting back, but he's losing. Badly. He stumbles back, and the others just watch in silence. His sword, it's starting to frost over from the cold. The other's sword is glowing with that eerie blue light.
It's a visual representation of their power, their otherworldly nature. Royce is fighting a losing battle against something he doesn't even understand.
And then, the pale sword pierces Royce's armor. He screams in pain, and his blood, it steams as it hits the snow. Red as fire against the white.
It's this stark, unforgettable image. The red blood, a symbol of life and warmth, juxtaposed against the cold, white snow and the pale, cold creature that inflicted the wound.
The other speaks then, and Will doesn't understand the language. It sounds like the cracking of ice on a winter lake, and the tone. It's mocking, cruel.
The language of the others is another reminder of their alien nature. It sets them apart from humanity. There's something else entirely.
Royce, even as he's dying, shouts, "For Robert!" and swings his frost-covered sword one last time.
It's a final act of defiance, a last desperate attempt to cling to his identity as a knight.
But the steel shatters on contact. Royce's beautiful sword breaks into pieces. He screams, blinded by pain and shock.
The shattering of the sword is symbolic, isn't it? It represents the futility of human strength against the power of the others.
And then the others descend on him. Cold butchery, the text says. Their swords slice through his armor like it's nothing. Will closes his eyes, but he can still hear the sounds. The distant voices, the laughter. It's described as sharp as icicles.
It's a chilling description that emphasizes the brutality of the others, their complete lack of mercy.
Will waits, paralyzed by fear, for what feels like an eternity. Finally, he climbs down from the tree, and he finds Royce's body, broken, lying face down in the snow. His cloak is slashed, and he looks young, vulnerable.
In death, Royce is stripped of his arrogance, his pride. He's just a boy, a victim of forces beyond his understanding.
Will picks up the broken pieces of Royce's sword. It's all he has, the only proof of what he's seen. He plans to return to the wall, to tell Gored, Mormont, Maester Aemon. He's still searching for some way to understand, to make sense of this horror.
He's clinging to that hope that the experienced members of the Night's Watch, the keepers of ancient knowledge, will be able to offer some explanation.
And then, Suema Royce rises. He's standing over Will, his clothes are torn, his face is ruined. A shard of his own sword is stuck in his eye, the eye white and blind.
It's the ultimate horror, the moment that confirms everything. The others can reanimate the dead, and that realization has terrifying implications for the world.
And then Royce's right eye opens, and it's burning with that blue light it sees.
That blue eye. It's the mark of the other, the sign of their control. Royce is no longer human, he's something else.
Will drops the broken sword and closes his eyes, whispering a prayer. And then he feels icy cold hands closing around his throat.
A chilling end to a chilling encounter.
So listener, what do we take away from all of this? This wasn't just a simple case of dead wildlings. This was a terrifying encounter with something ancient, something powerful, something other. All the skepticism, all the attempts to rationalize. They were all swept aside by the supernatural reality that these men, especially Royce, were completely unprepared for.
And the really important thing to remember is that shift in understanding. We start with this mystery, this seemingly solvable problem of the dead wildlings, and it quickly transforms into this chilling revelation of a supernatural threat that completely defies human comprehension. The real aha moment is realizing that the initial sense of unease wasn't about normal dangers, but about something much deeper, much more sinister.
It really makes you think about how we see the world, doesn't it? How our own experiences and biases can shape our understanding of events. We saw this play out through Garrett's weariness, Will's growing fear, and Royce's fatal arrogance. They each viewed the situation through their own limited lens.
And their existing frameworks of knowledge were simply not enough to grasp the true horror of what they faced.
So here's a thought for you, listener. Think about those subtle warnings that were there all along. The unnatural cold, the growing sense of dread, Garrett's stories. How often do we ignore those feelings, those signs that something isn't quite right, because we want a simpler explanation?
What dangers might we be overlooking in our own lives because we're too quick to dismiss the things that don't fit neatly into our understanding of the world?
Maybe, like the men of the Night's Watch, we're missing something lurking just beyond the edge of our awareness, and maybe, just maybe, we ignore it at our own peril.
Something to think about, isn't it?